Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, It's a Great Idea, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. My name is Kathy Powell, and I'm going to be your virtual host today. This presentation is brought to you by the Parents of the Panhandle Information Network, a program of Family Network on Disabilities funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. And now a little bit about myself. I have 2 boys with disabilities. My youngest has autism with expressive language delays, and my oldest son has mild to moderate ADHD. I remember that first IEP going through all the pages of the plan for the first time. It felt like I was signing off on a car or a house. It was very overwhelming. But learning the basics of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, I found my voice and slowly began to speak up and participate in more IEP meetings. And bit by bit, I understood the special education acronyms, the process, and the accommodations. In fact, by the time my son was reevaluated, I knew what questions to ask to get the appropriate assessments, shedding light on new services and supports to help him learn and progress both academically and even socially. So I hope that through the information that I share today, that you will feel more confident at your own IEP meetings. Family Network on Disabilities is a family-driven grassroots organization. What makes FND unique is that the majority of our staff are parents or family members of persons with disabilities. When family members call FND, they not only receive the expertise and knowledge of a professional, but also the compassion and empathy of someone who has walked and continues to walk in their shoes. FND is a nonprofit 501c3 founded in 1985 by a group of parents of children with disabilities just sitting around the dining room table, coming together for mutual support and information sharing. We do not act as attorneys. We don't represent families, and we don't give legal advice. We do provide support. We often get calls from parents or other family members who just need to talk, and we're there to listen. We provide information. Altogether, FND logs over 15,000 calls a year, most of them from parents, family members, or professionals who are looking for information. We have a large database of resources in Florida and a library filled with disability-related information. Regardless of the question, our staff will go the extra mile to find an answer. We identify options. Our philosophy at FND is that it's not our role to tell families what to do. It is our role, however, to inform families on what their options are and encourage them to make their own decisions about what is right for their family. Real quick, some housekeeping items. Out of courtesy for everyone's time, we will have your microphones muted. This presentation will last approximately 1 hour, and we will allow some time for questions at the end of the presentation. If you have questions you'd rather ask privately, you can see our contact information at the end of the presentation, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. A copy of this presentation, along with handouts and all Q&A, will be shared at the end as well. There are approximately 6.7 million children and youth with disabilities in public schools across the United States. Some children have trouble learning to read or write, others have a hard time remembering new information, and still others may have challenges with their behavior, seeing, hearing, speaking, or moving their bodies. IDEA is a United States law that mandates accountability in education for children with disabilities. It entitles eligible children with disabilities to specially designed instruction and individualized services Here's the flow of what I'll be covering today. IDEA is composed of 4 parts. I'll define what each part is responsible for. There are 6 guiding principles of IDEA. We'll cover those. I'll be educating you on the frameworks of response to intervention and multi-tiered system of support. We'll spend some time on the 10 steps to understanding the special education process. We'll also explore the top 8 components of the Individualized Education Plan, also known as the IEP. And I'll be sharing information on disciplining students with disabilities and both informal and formal options for resolving dispute. And last, I will have some resources to share at the end of the presentation, along with handouts. IDEA has 4 distinct sections, sections A, B, C, and D. Each part of the law has remained largely the same since the original enactment in 1975. Let's take a look at each one. Part A is titled General Provisions, Definitions, and Other Issues. It's very important because it discusses the purpose of the special education law. Part A also includes definitions of terms that are used in the statute and describes the requirements and timelines for the federal special education regulations. It also advises that states are not immune from suit if they violate IDEA. Part B is titled Assistance for Education of All Children with Disabilities, and it refers to special education for children with disabilities from ages 3 to 21. Part B of the law, which is the main program and the section we'll be focusing on today, authorizes grants to state and local education agencies to offset part of the cost of the K-12 education needs of children with disabilities. It also includes funding, state plans, evaluations, eligibility, due process, discipline, and other areas related to direct services, and we'll discuss some of these in future slides. Part C is infants and toddlers with disabilities. The term at-risk infant or toddler is defined as an individual under 3 years of age who would be at risk of experiencing a substantial developmental delay if early intervention services were not provided. Part C requires a comprehensive child find system and individual family service plans, known as IFSPs, that are similar to IEPs in Part B. It is a requirement that early intervention take place in a natural environment setting, such as the home or community setting where the child is also with peers without disabilities. Early intervention ends when they turn 3 years old, and then they transition to Part B and enter the school system. Part D is called the National Activities to Improve Education of Children with Disabilities, and it refers to efforts the government will take on a national level. It includes 2 subparts. One is State Program Improvement Grants for Children with Disabilities. This is training for agencies and school personnel. Subpart 2 is Coordinated Research, Personnel Preparation, Technical Assistance, Support, and Dissemination of information such as support and trainings for parents and community. Parent training and information centers and parent resource centers are mentioned in this section of the law. Following are 6 guiding principles of the IDEA, focusing on students' rights and the responsibilities of public schools to children with disabilities. The Zero Reject Principle ensures that all children receive a free and appropriate public education, no matter how severe their disability. A child may not be excluded because a school district feels they are too disabled to learn, has inappropriate behavior caused by their disability, or has a contagious disease unless there's a high risk that the student will infect other students. FAPE, or free and appropriate public education, comes at no charge to the family. It levels the playing field for students, and is designed to meet the child's unique needs. The laws governing evaluations for eligibility for special education services are designed to ensure that students continue to receive the services they need, that students are evaluated in a fair and equal manner without any discriminatory bias, and that parents remain informed throughout the evaluation process. The Individualized Education Plan, also known as the IEP, was established by IDEA to help ensure that every child is given a free and appropriate public education. It is a written document developed by the IEP team, which draws upon existing evaluation information in order to meet a student's unique educational needs. Under IDEA, the IEP must include information regarding a student's present level of educational performance, annual goals, and services. It is also required to include information regarding consistent reporting on student progress as well as transition to adult life. Finally, it is required that an IEP account for the planning concerns of the parent and child, the strengths of a particular child, and the specific academic, developmental, and functional needs of the child. The law also requires that students with disabilities be educated in the least restrictive environment, also known as LRE. This means that the district must show that it has attempted to provide services to the student in a classroom setting that is as close to the general education setting as possible. Unless your student has severe medical or physical or behavioral impairments that require specialized staff, districts should try to include him or her in the general education classroom as much as possible. If the district would like to offer services in a more exclusive environment, such as a special education classroom, it must prove that the student cannot be successful in a less restrictive environment. IDEA has a special provision for parent participation and youth participation in placement decisions. Under this provision, state education agencies and local school boards must ensure that parents of a child with a disability are members of any group that makes decisions regarding the placement and LRE or least restrictive environment of that child. Parents have the right to equal participation in this process and are entitled to notification of a planned evaluation, access to planning and evaluation materials, and involvement in all meetings regarding their child's placement. Additionally, parents retain the right to refuse further evaluation of their child. Both students and parents must be invited to IEP meetings, and the IDEA explicitly establishes a role for the parent as equal participant and decision maker. Before a school can assess a child for a disability or continue or terminate services, it must receive signed consent from the parent. And until that consent is obtained, the school cannot evaluate a student. To do so is a violation of the law. Once the child has been assessed and the district uses the information gained to continue, alter, or discontinue services it provides, it must once again receive consent from the parents. Schools are required to evaluate a student in his or her own native language before they can identify that student as having a disability and providing special education services. In addition, parents must be offered evaluation plans and IEPs in their native language before giving informed consent. As a parent, you are entitled to information about your rights under the Individuals with Disability Education Act. These rights or procedural safeguards are intended to ensure that you have the opportunity to be a partner in the educational decisions made regarding your child. Procedural safeguards are written and designed to protect the rights of children with disabilities and their parents. There are 13 categories under IDEA under which a child can receive these services. The bottom line is that in each category of the disability, there must be an impact on the student's education caused by the disability, and the student must be deemed in need of special designed instruction. After all, not all children with a disability require special education services. And the categories include autism spectrum disorder, deaf and blindness, deaf or hard of hearing, emotional behavioral disabilities, hearing impaired, intellectual disabilities, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disabilities, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visually impaired. In 2004, a change in educational thinking brought us Response to Intervention, RTI, a framework that many schools use to help students who are struggling with academics. Congress acted on concerns about the increasing number of students in special education and suspicion that many students currently classified as having a specific learning disability might have avoided the need for special education if instructional support and interventions had been provided to them sooner. The 3 tiers of RTI provide teachers with accurate and timely information that help them identify students at risk for poor learning outcomes, monitor student progress, provide evidence-based interventions, and adjust the intensity and nature of interventions depending on a student's responsiveness. A multi-tiered system of support, also known as MTSS, is more comprehensive. It may include the 3 levels of RTI, but MTSS goes beyond just academics. It also covers social and emotional supports. That means it can include a behavioral intervention plan. MTSS covers the adults at school too. Those are our teachers. It includes things like professional development and focuses on creative ways for them to team up to help struggling students. Other things that fall under the MTSS umbrella are positive behavior intervention supports, professional development, technology tools, teamwork, and parent action. There are 10 basic steps in the special education process. Step 1, the child is identified as possibly needing special education. Step 2, a child is evaluated. Step 3, eligibility is decided. Step 4, the child is found eligible. Step 5, IEP meeting is scheduled. Step 6, the IEP meeting is held. Step 7, the services and placement are determined. Step 8, progress is measured. Step 9, the IEP is reviewed. And finally, Step 10, the child is reevaluated. IDEA requires that children with disabilities from birth to 21 are located, evaluated, and identified. Remember, this is called Child Find. First, a child is identified as possibly needing special education and related services. The referral can originate from a parent, a teacher, or other school personnel. If the parent is making the referral, it is best to put the request for evaluation in writing. The clock does not run from the date of the request for the evaluation, but instead, as the statute reads, it begins to run upon receiving parental consent for the evaluation. In other words, have your written request also note that this letter is the consent for the evaluation. Any and all decisions regarding evaluation require the school district to inform and invite the parent to be a participant. There should be no decision about whether or how to evaluate without the parents being part of the team's discussion. A group of qualified personnel will decide whether to evaluate or not and create a plan for the evaluation to answer the following 3 questions. Does your child have a disability? Does the disability cause an educational impact to his or her education? And is the child in need of special education defined as specially designed instruction? If a parent disagrees with the district's evaluation based upon the district's failure to assess the child in a specific area of need, the parent has the right to request an individual education evaluation, or an IEE, at public expense in that area to determine whether the child has a disability and the nature and extent of the special education and related services the child needs. At that point, the district is required to either request a due process hearing to show that its evaluation is appropriate or provide the requested IEE at its expense. In interpreting evaluation data, each public agency is to draw upon information from a variety of sources, including aptitude and achievement tests, parent input, teacher recommendations, physical conditions, social or cultural backgrounds, and adaptive behaviors. If the child is found to be a child with a disability, as defined by IDEA, he or she will then be eligible for special education and related services. Within 30 calendar days after a child is determined eligible, a team of school professionals and the parents must meet to write an individualized education program, also known as IEP, for that child. The next step will be to design the program for him or her that will address his or her unique needs. The IEP is a meeting, and it's also a written statement that is developed, reviewed, and revised by the IEP team. This team consists of parents, students, when appropriate, general education teachers, ESE teachers, therapists, and a representative from the local education agency, and anyone that works with your child that has information relevant to your child's learning needs. In fact, anyone may be invited to participate and assist with developing and/or revising the individual education plan. The IEP team must consider the student's academic, developmental, and functional needs when developing this IEP. We always advise being as well prepared as possible for your child's IEP meeting. This, of course, means being able to review the majority of the documents presented at your child's IEP to give you some time to formulate any questions or comments to present during the meeting. Sometimes a draft IEP is sent home for parents to review prior to any meetings if you request it. Although the development of the draft IEP is frowned upon, this can give you extra time to be able to put together a good amount of questions, concerns, and comments on your child's IEP. No IEP decisions should be made without your participation, nor should you feel you are not able to participate because you have not been handed a document earlier. A related service is required in order for the child to receive FAPE, Free and Appropriate Public Education, and it should be described in the IEP document along with details about when and how this will be provided. There are 5 domains in an IEP to consider when thinking of services and placement. Domain A is curriculum and learning environment. Domain B is social and emotional behavioral. Domain C is independent functioning. Domain D, healthcare. And Domain E, communication. Related services can include, but are not limited to, any of the following. In fact, it's specific to your child's IEP and the services that they will need to be successful. In addition to a formal meeting, you should also be in constant communication with your child's special education teacher. He or she should be monitoring your child's progress on academic and other goals and be prepared to present you with updated data regularly. The instruments and methods used to measure progress must also document how often the results or data will be reported and how it will be communicated, whether it be through a meeting, phone, email, documentation sent to home in a backpack, in a communication book. There's many different ways. Also keep in mind the IEP is a legal document that must be implemented with fidelity, and you have the right to request evidence of implementation. The IEP must be reviewed at least once a year to determine if the program is meeting your child's needs. After the initial IEP meeting, you will meet with your child's IEP team on an annual basis to review your child's progress and modify the plan as needed. You can also request an IEP meeting at any time throughout the school year if you feel that there is an issue that must be resolved by the IEP team. You will attend an IEP meeting every year until he or she graduates or stops receiving special education. It is imperative that you attend these meetings. A reevaluation may occur not more than once a year unless the parent and the public agency agrees otherwise, and must occur at least once every 3 years unless the parent and the public agency agree that a reevaluation is unnecessary. And this should be done in writing. Every 3 years, your child will undergo a new round of assessments to determine his or her continued eligibility for special education services. You will be presented with this information at the tri-annual meeting. If the IEP team and other qualified professionals, as appropriate, determine that no additional data are needed to determine whether the child continues to be a child with a disability, and to determine child's educational needs, the public agency must notify the child's parents of that determination and the reason for the determination, and the rights of the parent to request an assessment to determine whether the child continues to be a child with a disability and to determine the child's educational needs. Before going into the specifics of what must be included in an IEP, it's important to consider the big picture of it, its purpose, how it serves as a blueprint for the child's special education and related services under IDEA, and the scope of activities and settings it covers. The IEP has 2 general purposes. 1, to establish measurable annual goals for your child, and 2, to state the special education and related services and supplementary aids if necessary that the public agency will provide to or on behalf of the child. When constructing an appropriate educational program for a child with a disability, the IEP team broadly considers the child's involvement and participation in 3 main areas of school life: the general education curriculum, the extracurricular activities, and non-academic activities. When we talk about extracurricular activities and non-academic activities, we're referring to school activities that fall outside of the realm of the general curriculum. These can include volunteers, opportunities, social and physical extracurricular activities. They typically involve others of the same age and may be organized and guided by teachers or other school personnel. Some other examples are yearbook, school newspaper, sports, school clubs, lunch, recess, band, pep rallies, assemblies, field trips, after-school programs, or any recreational clubs. There are 8 top parts to the individualized education program. Knowing the components of an IEP will help you keep your child's IEP team and education on track. PLOFT. No, it's not a sneeze, although it sounds like one. If you try to say it out loud, PLAA and FP, It's another special education acronym that stands for Present Levels of Academic Achievement and Functional Performance. You may also see it as PLOP, which stands for Present Levels of Performance. IDEA requires that each IEP must include a statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. This part of the IEP is commonly referred to as present level statement or present levels. The present level statement is crafted by considering the areas of development in which a child with a disability may need support. These are roughly divided into two parts in areas of development, academic and functional. Neither of these terms, academic, achievement, or functional performance, is defined specifically in IDEA. The IEP must contain an explanation of how progress towards goals and objectives will be measured and describe how that information will be reported to parents. This gives parents a clear idea of how their child's advancement will be evaluated. The IEP team, which includes the parents, develops the academic and functional goals based on your child's present level of performance. Reports from you and the teacher, as well as evaluations and performance on state assessments, provide the basis for deciding areas to focus on for your child. In addition, your state's academic content standards, which are Florida state standards, for your child's grade level can serve as a reference point for setting goals for your child. If you prepare some ideas before the meeting, you'll feel more comfortable helping them to complete this section of the IEP and in participating in the process. Goals must relate directly to the area of need identified in the present level of performance. They should be prioritized in order of greatest need and be stated in objective, measurable terms. IDEA lists 5 special factors that the IEP team must consider in the development, review, and revision of each child's IEP. Those include behavior, limited English proficiency, blindness or visual impairment, communication needs or deafness, and assistive technology, or the need for assistive technology. To ensure that children are educated in the least restrictive environment to the greatest extent appropriate, the IEP team must consider if and how the child will participate in a general education program with children in mainstream classrooms. The IEP team must specify the amount of time a child will participate in mainstream education programs and explain the rationale for that decision. Ideally, placement should start with least restrictive, with supports with the least restrictive starting at the top. Parents must give permission for placement changes as part of the initial IEP. The IEP must explain what types of testing adaptations and modifications will be used with the student and why they are necessary. If the child will participate in alternative assessment, the rationale for that decision must be included in the IEP. The IEP must include a projected beginning and end date of services, the frequency of the service, where they will be delivered, and how long they will be provided. There are 5 domains used to group the types of services: curriculum and learning, social emotional behavior, independent functioning, healthcare, and communication. A matrix of services is completed using information found in the student's IEP. It should reflect the individual services and supports which will be provided to each student as documented by the IEP team. Districts must ensure that matrices reflect current services. If services change as a result of an IEP team decision, a new matrix of services must be completed. Each domain has 5 levels as well. These levels range from level 1, which is the lowest, to level 5 being the highest. The factors that are used to determine the levels are frequency of service, intensity of service, and in some cases, qualifications of the person providing the service. The total number of points results in a rating of support level 1, also known as 251, level 2, marked as 252, level 3 is 253, level 4 is 254, and support level 5 is 255. The matrix of services is an official, auditable document. Starting at age 14, an IEP must include measurable goals for the student's anticipated post-secondary program and a description of the services needed for the child to reach those goals. Transitional goals and services focus on instruction and support services needed to help the child move from the school environment and into a job, vocational program, or other program designed to promote independent living. With the reauthorization of IDEA, all states are now required to have 3 dispute resolution processes at a minimum. However, parents should first attempt to resolve those conflicts within the school district processes. Typically, that process starts with a special IEP team meeting where parents' concerns are voiced and resolutions are explored. Sometimes it takes more than one meeting and more than one change to that child's IEP. If the dispute isn't resolved by that process, then the parents may consider taking his or her case to the district special education director, and a facilitated IEP meeting can be scheduled. An IEP facilitator serves the whole group rather than an individual and assists the group with the process of the IEP meeting rather than the content of the IEP. The agenda for a facilitated IEP meeting is the IEP process, and the focus of the meeting is the student and his or her needs. If parents and the school still cannot reach an agreement, it's good to know that IDEA includes specific and formal ways for them to resolve the conflict. These are mediation, filing a complaint, and due process. In mediation, parents and school personnel sit down with an impartial third person called a mediator to talk openly about the areas where they disagree and try to reach an agreement. A state complaint may be filed by parents or by an organization or individual, including those from another state. Written directly to the state education agency, state complaints must describe what requirements of IDEA the school has violated, among other specific things. They must also be signed. Each state education agency must develop a model form to assist parents and other parties in filing state complaints. Due process. When due process is issued as a way to resolve disputes, parents and the school present evidence before an impartial third person called a hearing officer, and he or she decides how to resolve the problem based upon that evidence and the requirements of IDEA. Filing a due process complaint is the first step in the process that may lead to due process hearing. The complaint must include specific information as follows: the child's name, the address where the child resides, the name of the school the child is attending, a description of the conflict, and a proposed resolution of the conflict to the extent known and available to the person filing the complaint. There's guidance on discipline policies. Consequences for problem behavior should not discriminate against a child based on his disability. Yet schools continue to suspend and expel students with disabilities for behavior caused by their disabilities. All students can benefit from school-wide positive behavior supports that promotes a culture of competence by shared expectations, experiences, and language. When a child with a disability engages in behavior or breaks a code of conduct, and the school proposes to remove the child, The school must hold a hearing to determine if the child's behavior was caused by his disability. This hearing, a manifestation determination review, is a process to review all relevant information and the relationship between the child's disability and the behavior. We're coming up on the conclusion of our webinar. I wanted to make sure that I shared some important links for resources. And introduce you to our FND University, where we keep many archived webinars for your convenience. This is the rest of our FND family. At the top, you will see all 3 parent training and information centers. Center, we have Family Star, which is our statewide parent-to-parent, and our emerging advocates group, and our National Special Needs Trust, administered by our home office, Family Network on Disabilities. Please complete our evaluation that I will be emailing you. We want to hear from you so that we can continue to provide you with quality webinars. Thank you for participating in this webinar. I am going to be taking questions now. If anybody would like to type some in, if you would rather send them via email, you can send them directly to me at kathyp@fndfl.org, or you can call our home office at 1-800-825-5736.